webinars are made possible thanks to generous donor support. If you'd like to contribute, please visit our website, autism.org.
Now, before we get started, I'll introduce our speaker. Moira Peña is an experienced occupational therapist working with children and youth on the autism spectrum at Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital in Toronto, Canada. She's an expert hub team member of the ECHO Ontario Autism Program, which aims to further develop pediatricians, school psychologists, and teachers' skills to best support autistic children and youth and their families. A published researcher, she has presented nationally and internationally to parents, teachers, occupational therapy practitioners, and other healthcare professionals. Moira is also the proud creator and host of Holland Bloorview's Autism Summit.
And welcome, everyone. I'm very excited to be here again and answer your questions live. So we'll get started. So Denise sent me a few. So the first one I'm going to address is called, why do sensory issues seem to affect people with autism at a higher frequency than typical populations? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to some of the slides that I used for my presentation, and I'm going to show you the reason why autistic people experience sensory processing differences is because it affects up to 96% of children, as well as 94% of autistic adults. And these sensory experiences affect them to such an extent that it impacts their ability to function and to participate in what they need, in what they want to do. And, you know, being neurotypical or part of the neuromajority, that it makes it very challenges for us to know what that feels like if somebody is not autistic. So this is why it's so important to ask autistic people to tell us about their lived experience, so that then we can then understand better and actually recognize how difficult life must be when the world is so unpredictable and causes possibly painful experiences for you. So I hope that answers that question. Okay. Another question that I had is, okay, let's go with this one. How to explain sensory processing differences to my mother-in-law? He is not being a brat, right? So again, since the neuromajority does not usually experience significant sensory processing differences, the way that I explain this is when, for example, I say, you know, when you were pregnant and if you had that symptom where you felt really ill, you wanted to throw up. I never had that actually, and I really, I wanted to feel that because I felt that that would give me, that I would experience what it feels like for autistic people most of the time. So I sort of make sure that I explain an experience where that person has felt a sensory processing differences. And we all do in some parts of our lives. So if you're feeling sick, if you have a headache, then the lights might become painful for you. Like I said, pregnancy, there's all these differences in pregnancy and people feel the sensory differences and then they go away. So I think people can understand it better if you're able to explain an experience that that person may have gone through. Because when we understand things, we can reframe behaviors. So I hope that's helpful. Okay, I have a comment here. Okay, let's see. So how to control jumping in my 4-year-old kid. So I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to answer another question at the same time. So just give me a minute to read, and then I'll go back to your question there. From Albert, can Moira discuss why such high % of people on the autism spectrum experience sensory sensitivity? She only told us about the prevalence, but not the pathophysiology. There are several theories in the literature. Does she have a preference? And Albert, I wonder if you could write on the chat what theories you have come across or you're interested in. Remember, as an occupational therapist, I am a lot more interested into how the behavior affects function and participation. So, you know, I'm not like, as a doctor, I may be more interested in the physiology and the pathophysiology and the ins and outs of the brain. But for me, as an occupational therapist, what I support autistic people with is for them to participate and function in whatever activity they need to do. So that is why that would not be a focus of mine. But I would love to know your ideas about why sensory processing differences are more prevalent in the autistic population. Okay. Mariana, so the daughter of a friend of mine, 7 years old, struggles with speaking. Is there any way I can help her or encourage her to learn speaking? And that's very kind of you. And I would say that's a really good question to ask a speech language pathologist, because there could be so many reasons why somebody may have trouble with speaking. It could be motor, it could be your ability to put words together, it could be so many things. So certainly I would suggest that your friend seek an appointment with a speech language pathologist, if at all possible, because that's their area of expertise. I hope that's helpful. Okay. Okay. Let me just go to the Q&A and we'll go to those questions. Have you observed sensory issues affected by any medications? And Rafat, I'm going to ask you to put in the Q&A what you mean, what have you seen that you may think have been affected by medications? If you could give me a little bit more clarity around that question, that would help. My son is hyperactive and mildly autistic. He doesn't imitate speech. Can you recommend some therapies to control his hyperactivity? So I'm not sure if you saw my presentation, but remember when I talked about a sensory diet? And I'm going to answer that question as well, because somebody asked me, what's a sensory diet? So let me just get to that on my presentation, and then we can talk about what to do. So remember that a sensory diet is this approach where you are embedding sensory input throughout the day to help that person achieve what we call a self-regulation state. So when the body is regulated, and then we're more able to control it. And the way that we recommend is really through the different sensory systems. And what I talked about during my presentation was adding what I call the power senses into your day. So, and I think I gave you some ideas. So let me get into those ideas. So remember, for vestibular, so movement ideas, the goal is for you to try to embed different activities that have movement in them. And in that way, your child then may have that sensory need met, and then they may not seek it, right? So the idea is that, you know, you give them an opportunity for vestibular input in a way that looks, in a way that feels more manageable for the family or for you. And then that person then may not be seeking the same movement experience in a way that may be unsafe. So I gave you some ideas here. So for example, you might want to consider some flexible seating. So having your child sit on a beanbag chair, for example, because that gives you also deep pressure and the child can move. A chair ball is also very much recommended. So again, a surface that's movable. It's about looking for opportunities to add movement into your day in ways that it doesn't feel like it's extra work. So it's just part of your day. So it could be something like having your child push the laundry basket and bring it to the other end of your room. So you're getting some vestibular input and also deep pressure input. So I hope that helps. And again, watch my presentation and you'll get some ideas from that. Okay, let's keep going. Okay. I have a 14-year-old high-functioning autistic son with sensory integration and proprioception vestibular issues, compounded by structural issues in his lower extremities. Also, he has an ARFID-like aversion to most foods. My question, how can I approach helping him, and how might one remediation feed into another? Okay, so this is my interpretation of your question. So your youth has sensory processing differences in movement. So he's either seeking movement or not moving enough. Proprioception, meaning he has difficulties around his body awareness, and also ARFID-like presentation. So ARFID is and the name just escapes me right now. It is restrictive food intake disorder. I forget what the A is right now, but that means that your youth is really having issues around eating a variety of foods, okay? Avoidant, restrictive food intake disorder. Okay, so I just wanted to explain that. I think and I'm not sure if a sensory diet approach has been recommended for you, Carl, but the idea here, if the person is autistic, have helpful sensations throughout the day will help. Now, when it comes to feeding, that is a whole area in autism that we all work very hard on, because autistic people do tend to have very restrictive diets. And again, a way that you might be able to use the power senses for that might be something like, for example, doing a tug of war or pushing his hands together right before he's at the table, so that he gets some deep pressure into his body, for then to be able to maybe get some more body awareness and stay seated to be able to eat, to get his positioning on the chair. So there's many, the sensory diet approach is helpful for optimal functioning. So I do think it weaves in different areas of your life. So if it's helpful for one area and also helpful for others. I hope that answers your question. Okay, let me keep going here. Behavior analyst here. I work with adults and children and struggle to find age-appropriate tools for adults. Any resources? Also, how to help explain SPD can change and display differently throughout life. Absolutely. So in terms of age-appropriate tools for adults, so I assume that you're talking about sensory tools. And, this is something, and I would love the autistic self-advocates to chime in here, but this is something that I've learned from autistic adults, where I used to be quite reluctant to recommend tools that sort of look childish. So for example, let me see if I have one here. So something like this. Do you see this tangle? So in the past, I would have said, that's sort of these bright colors, and that's really meant for a child. So I would stay away from actually recommending tools like that. But I've been corrected by autistic people, and they have said to me, you know what, it is not about being age appropriate. It's about using a tool because I need it. Because I need it for self-regulation. Because if I'm able to use this tool, like a Tangle, then I may be then able to take a bus to go where I want to go. It may be these different tools. It could be like a crunchy snack, like gum. It could be like ear defenders. It could be a little sort of visually appealing type of tool. So they've told me that they use all of these things like a sensory kit that they use to help them get through their daily life. So I would be more inclined to see what the preference of that person may be. So just to be curious and maybe show just different types of tools and see what that person gravitates towards, and then implement it. And try it, and at least try it for, as you know, as a behavior therapist, at least 4 weeks to see if it helps that person to support behavior. I hope that's helpful. Okay. Okay. So Usman, I already talked about hyperactivity. And again, go back to my presentation and look through all the different ideas that I gave in that presentation. So it's not about controlling his hyperactivity. It's about meeting his need for movement with intention. So you are able to implement an activity, and it's short duration, high intensity, right? So it could be something like a high five before he goes out the door. It could be something like you are jumping on the spot and counting to 10. But the idea is then that you're being intentional about meeting his need for movement, so that then he's not seeking it elsewhere in a way that you are not then able to put some boundaries around it. I hope that's helpful. Okay, so let's keep going. Do you have any good resources for affordable equipment? And Erica, I wonder what kind of equipment you're looking for. Like, are you thinking of a swing, which is, you know, I try to stay with household items, whatever you have in the home. So as much as possible, try not to spend too much money with equipment. So help me out and tell me which equipment you're thinking about, because in my presentations, I really try to keep to stuff that you could use at home. But again, just let me know what you're thinking about. Okay. My 12-year-old has vocal stereotype that affects his learning and sleep. What is the best strategy you have known for vocalizations? I assume that's what you're getting at, Pushpa. And you know, vocalizing, it's a behavior that could be meeting several needs. So for example, there lots of autistic people enjoy the vibration that some of the vocalization does in the inner ear somehow. And you can tell that, right? Like there's a sensory, we call that egosyntonic behavior. So there's like a bit of a high or a joy that comes with some of these vocalizations or other types of stimming behaviors. Those are challenging because they feel good. And when something feels good, it is very hard to stop. So I wonder what you've tried already. So have you tried, for example, providing him with something to keep his mouth occupied? So for example, like a chewy, some sort of tool, or like some sort of, again, intentional snack at times that you really want him to try and you know, it's not about controlling the behavior. And I think we have to learn to accept differences, but it's more around, are there specific times in the day when he would benefit from having some control around that behavior? So that would be the way I would approach it. And I hope that's helpful. Jose, can the medication methylphenidate affect sensory issues? And Jose, you're gonna have to forgive me because I don't know what the medication is. And remember, I'm not a doctor. So I don't wanna be talking outside of my scope, and medications are not my scope. So I'm sorry, I'm not helpful with that situation, because occupational therapists, what we do is we use non-pharmacological lifestyle interventions to help function and participation in meaningful daily activities. So, so I have to say that's outside of my scope. Okay. And Carl, you came back and you said that your 14-year-old son went to OT a couple of years ago, but he was the only older child there, and it didn't seem to benefit him much. We're taking him in for more appropriate manual OT next. He has compensated over time to remain high functioning in his environment and at school, but he's very attached to his learned ruts and strenuously avoids deviating from them through rationalizing. You know, Carl, what I would suggest for you is to try and, if you can, he's 14, your son, try and learn. This is what I've done. And I'm telling you, it's been a lot of learning and unlearning that I've been doing over the last couple of years, just because a lot of autistic people are online now and they tell us about their experiences. And so from what you're saying here, talking to me about him being very attached to his routines, that's very much a way that autistic people are able to just function in this world. They just need routines, and they struggle with change. And I would say, now that we've been through a pandemic, collectively gone through a pandemic, we all know how dysregulating unpredictability is. All of us, right? So we didn't know what was coming. And so people's emotions were, and still are, all over the place. And so by setting routines and sticking to routines, we're able to manage our anxiety. And that was one of the recommendations that we were all given during the pandemic. You know, try to stick to your old routines as much as possible. And this is why. And this is why your son does what he does. So I think perhaps, Carl, you know, it's choosing your battles. What is it that we can be okay with? And especially if you live in the States, you know, with this whole neurodiversity movement coming around, and us recognizing that autistic people are different, but that doesn't mean that they're less. It's just a different form of neurodiversity. So, and you know, I can send Denise a lot of the resources that I've learned from. So I hope she will also share that with everybody here. But I would say that would be my one nugget of, because you know, it's not about fixing a person. It's not about fixing a person. It's about, sometimes it's the environment that makes it disabling for that person. And so it's easier to start with the environment and the people around the person than it is to actually change something within that person, because we all of us, me included, have difficulties with change. Okay. All right. My son is 27 and presents aggression and self-aggression, and he wants to do what he wants. He's very intelligent. He studies at the university, accompanied. How do I help him? So Dora, you're talking about self-injury behavior. So, and here you go. Here's this whole concept of high functioning and low functioning. So here's your son, Dora, who goes to university, and he's accompanied and he's able to do his work. Yet he is being self-injurious and I would guess sometimes aggressive to others. So is that high functioning or low functioning? right? So again, we need to move away from these levels of functioning. We need to move away from that kind of talk. What we need to talk about is, does he have high needs? What kind of needs does he have? Because, you know, people like all of us, we need different supports depending on the context that we're in, right? So for example, if I were to travel to, I mean, I speak Spanish. So if I went to a Spanish speaking country, then yeah, I would have no difficulties finding my way around, right? So I don't need those external supports. So you could consider me high functioning in a Spanish speaking country. But if I went to, say, if I went to Tokyo, I would have no clue what people will be saying to me. So now we need a lot more support, whether that's on my GPS, whether that's on, you know, using signs to communicate. So is that low functioning or high functioning? So we have to think about that. It's about the context. So your son does well at school, he's got good supports, maybe he holds it together all day long, and then he comes home and he lets go. And I would say when it comes, I do hope that you're getting help, Dora, from the university. I hope that you are getting some student support help there. I don't know what the self-injury looks like, but I do know that people, and this is all of us, we tend to be most comfortable around at home. And that's when we kind of let go of like trying to, what autistic people call masking. They mask throughout the day. So they're being vigilant of themselves to try to behave in a way that conforms to neurotypical expectations. And then what happens is they come home and they're themselves again. And sometimes that involves a period of dysregulation from holding it together all day long. I hope that makes sense, Dora, but do seek help. And I hope that he's able to perhaps identify what are the triggers to his behavior. Okay. Eliane, I have a child who repeats my words after me. Is this a red flag? And Eliane, are you talking about, is this a symptom of autism? That's what I'm going to assume you're asking. So a child who repeats words right after you, we do call, if they're repeated exactly, we do call that echolalia. But again, Eliana, what I will say to you is have him assessed by a speech language pathologist, because this is their area of expertise. Communication, receptive language, expressive language, that is what a speech language pathologist will look at during an assessment. And then you'll have a clear picture as to why your child may be communicating in this way. I hope that's helpful. Okay, let's keep going. Oh my goodness, lots of questions. Okay, so my 27-year-old goes into periods where his body presents less regulated, sometimes hyper-regulated, so low tone, low engagement, fawning, and other times hyper-regulated, tensing pica. Pica is eating non-edibles, running, loud vocalizing. We have worked with many specialists, neuro, nutritional, behavioral, sensory specialists like OTs, SLPs, etc., but do not have a clear understanding of what is occurring. The most effective strategies to date are engagement in areas of interest and regular exercise with lots of deep pressure exercise. So weightlifting and stair-step machine, great. My question is about vocal stimming, right? We had that question by somebody else. He goes into long periods of loud vocal stimming, yelling or jargoning. It seems to help his self-regulation, and yet he can really inhibit his work and social opportunities, such as going to a movie. I know. What suggestions do you have for vocal stimming? Thank you for your description there. I think other people would really benefit from Rhonda's description as to the approach they use with their son. So being curious, what worked, doing more of that. So so you've seen a lot of people and you said, okay, yes, the deep pressure activities like the weightlifting and the stair machine really seems to help him control his body. So I really like that stance of curiosity, because that's what professionals do. We need to ask more questions. And sometimes we have more questions than answers, because again, human beings are complex. We're all different. And in autism, we need to embrace individual differences and expect complexity. So in autism, you would see it's most common to see a 2-year-old with just the diagnosis of autism. But as that person gets older, it's actually very rare to see a 16-year-old with just a diagnosis of autism. Autistic people tend to pick up different diagnoses as they get older. So whether that's a psychiatric condition like depression or ADHD is one that really comes with autism. And there's a lot of different conditions that autistic people just seem to just pick up as they get older. So again, keeping that in mind. Now for vocal stimming, what I'm gonna do is I did write a article on this because it's gonna take me a long time to get through. And I'm gonna send it to Denise to send to the group. And it's gonna give you lots of ideas around some of the things you could try. I think with vocal stimming, remember what I said about it being egosyntonic. There's something about it that feels good. And it's a sensory vibration. I don't know what it is. And sometimes I think autistic people experience the world in a way to such an intensity of sensory that we just have we don't have privy to that. There's such a joy in that. But yes, those behaviors can get in the way. So it's how does your son learn that, if I'm home, then I can vocalize all I want. But if I go to a movie, I need to have my tools to help me in regulating my body so that those vocalizations don't come out. Why? Because then it affects everybody else. And then people will be getting upset at a movie, right? So something to think about here, Rhonda, might be, can you get him to do his weightlifting right before he goes to the movie? As he's walking out of the car into the movie theater, can he carry something heavy so that when he's sitting, there's something heavy on him, like a backpack, for example. So again, see how you're putting deep pressure into his day. Can he then, right before he leaves the car, perhaps onto the movie theater, do a bit of the pushing that I talked about? Can he have some snacks, like say, dried mango strips, something that takes chewing, a lot of chewing, that he can bring with him to the movie, and then his mouth is then occupied. So then when he gets the urge to vocalize, there's something that he's doing with his mouth. I hope that's helpful, but I will send you all that article as well, because there's many other things you could try as well. Okay. Are there any free sensory kits available for either children or adults? Adriana, there are lots, we are coming, the world in autism is changing. We are recognizing that very often it's not the person that we need to change, but it's the environment that we need to change. So for example, you will go to a movie now, but sometimes they do have these sensory safe movies, right? Like where the sounds of the movie is actually lowered. You can go to a museum now and they will, a lot of them have these sensory kits available for free. I think, so here in Canada, where I'm in, for example, you could go to like the Ontario, like our science center, and you could have a map and look at the areas that are less sensory stimulating, for example. I think you could make up your own sensory kit very cheaply from the dollar store, as long as you know what your person needs Like, what are the tools that they need? And then you have those ready for you, and for that person to use if they need it during that event. I hope that's helpful. So I do believe that sensory kits can be made super cheap with whatever you have at home as well. I don't think you need to be spending a lot of money on that. Okay, let's keep going. So Rhonda, you answered back. We've been working a bit on understanding volume differences. Can we find solutions? Can you get what you need through low humming? And can you be successful at uni, at work? Yes, right? So sometimes you make a really good point there, Rhonda, is, okay, so the vocalizing gets loud, right? Really loud. So then if we are able to then change that so it becomes a hum, like a okay, that's a win. It's a win because he went from sort of this loud, again, people notice, to a humming. So in autism, I think what we need to do is celebrate every little, I mean, it may seem little, every single step of the way, every change, because, you know, this preference for sameness, and it's such a part of the autistic experience. I think any change that autistic people are able to make, it's something that we, you know, it's so hard for them. So we need to celebrate, you know, every change, every step forward is a victory when we're talking about autism. So I hope so thanks for commenting on that. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, one friend has a son who's very hyperactive. The daughter of another is very sensitive. Since we're all friends, is there any way we can create a safe space where both of these kids can feel well together? I love that question, Mariana. So what you're talking about is, you know, you have kids with different sensory profiles, and you don't have to be kids, you can be adults. I mean, it could either be also in your own partners. Your partner might have a very different sensory profile than you, you know. So for example, my husband is very sensory sensitive to things like lights at night. So whereas I don't notice, like I could have a TV going and I will still fall asleep because that I'm low registration, which means that it takes a lot for me to notice sensory sensory input. So, and you know, and again, like I'm talking about myself, you know, like I wouldn't notice different textures on my clothing, whereas he might. And then is, how do you live together? So, you know, you make compromises, right? So my compromise would be, well, he cannot sleep with like a light or like a phone light or a TV. So I just don't keep it in the bedroom, you know, after 10 p.m. So I make that compromise because, well, I can, if I wanted to watch TV, I can watch it somewhere else. So again, it's about compromising. So what can you live with? I would say in your case, if you're having get-togethers, just to prepare, just have some like different activity centers, like maybe in one of your tables at your place, you can have like some coloring for the sensitive child so they can go and color when they need a break. And then in another part of the room, there can be more of like an alerting type of area. So it could be like maybe like a little carpet where that person can sort of roll like a log, or they can do a bit more of this like moving around. But at least what you're doing there is that you're having areas that have boundaries. So that's where we do some rolling around. That's where we do some coloring. So then both those children will know where to go to get their sensory needs met. I hope that's helpful. That's what teachers do all the time in classrooms, right? They try to figure out what activity centers might be helpful for the children that they have. Okay. Let's see. Okay. I hope that was helpful. Okay, good question. How long does it take to see the changes in the kid after the sensory diet? That's a great question. And I would say, and this is what I see all the time. What I see all the time is that we give, like, and I'm talking also about, if there's therapists here, I'm talking to therapists as well. What we tend to do is we give up really easily. We try something, it sort of works today, it doesn't work tomorrow. And so then we say it didn't work and we just throw it out. We just say, okay, forget it, it didn't work. You know, remember, behavioral change is very difficult for all of us and it takes time. And so what you need to do is what behavioralists do very well, which is this taking data approach, where they say, okay, you know, let's try, say, for example, let's try putting some deep pressure activities right before my child has dinner to see if that might help him in controlling his anxiety. And then he might be more able to be at the table. He might be more able to try some new foods. So let's say that's your hypothesis. And then what you would do is, okay, so I'm going to put in a tug of war before I go to the table. And we're just going to hold it really tight and count to 10. And then we're going to go to the table. Okay, so you write that down. And then the next day, you might try something like putting your hands together, see if you can do that. And then again, you're putting deep pressure activities. So you're going to keep data and then you're going to find out, okay, what is it that he really actually liked? And out of these deep pressure activities, which one is it something that I can take on and embed? And I would say it take data for at least 4 weeks, you know, and then make a decision whether this worked or didn't work. For all of us, depending on our, like on the day. So if I'm hungry, if I'm tired, if I feel sick, something may not work for me just because of that day is just not a good day for me. So we're all human beings. So that's why you need to be consistent with something and take data and then do what we call a pre and a post and see, did that work? And then make some other change and again, take data. So I do think it's very valuable to just keep track of the things that you're trying to then make a decision, whether this is something that you will continue or something that we are going to have to call a productive fail. That's what I call them. And that is just how we find out, okay, that doesn't work, but you know what? I saw this, I'm going to try that instead. Okay. So even when it's failures, they're productive because it gives us information as to where we would go, what we would try next when we're supporting autistic people. I hope that's helpful. Okay. Let's keep going. My son, who's 8, moves a string or anything like a string in front of his eyes. So he's doing this, right? And he also turns the vacuum cleaner noise on in YouTube. So he will move the string and listen to the noise at the same time. If I am not redirecting, then he would do it all day long. It's become a behavior now. He also rubs his private parts a lot. Even doing sensory diet is not helping. How long should I allow this visual stimming, or shouldn't I allow it at all? Okay. Could I give you a sensory diet idea, especially around visual stimming? Okay, Afrin or Sharmina. Sorry, I don't know which one's your first name, but when people are doing, remember what I said, some of these stim behaviors, again, there's such level of joy. And, you know, with the strings, autistic people have told me that they're looking at the angles and the way the light shines through. And then he adds that sound, and, you know, it sort of becomes this sensory world, right? So the question is, do you stop him from doing that? And I would say no. I would say you choose. He's gonna learn that there are some times that is okay to do. And then you could possibly choose the time. So say if you're cooking, that might be a time when he is freely able, without you being on top of him, without you redirecting him, he's freely able to stim, you know. Again, that's a neurodiversity affirming practice. we recognize that stimming does have a self-regulation component to it, does help autistic people in some way, even when it looks really odd, right? So the question, I think, and I so wish we could all be in a room and we could talk about this, but I think that you use that stim behavior for times when you cannot be on him, for times when he's relaxed, for times when he does his play, right? That's his play as well. And you let that go. And then for times when you need him to be doing work and all the rest of it, that's when you can say, okay, let's, you're going to move him away, try to move him away from the environment where he's doing that behavior, so he learns to attach that stim to a certain area in your house, perhaps, and then redirect him to something else. Again, maybe it can be that to the point where he can just do the visual and the sound doesn't have to be there, right? Maybe that's where you start. But stopping a stim behavior, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work, and it just causes so much distress. It's not worth it. So it's more around intentionally embedding it into the person's day to help the family function. And then teaching that person that, hey, you're going to be able to do this during these times, during your day, but right now we're doing homework. And so we're going to go to that table and I'm going to support you with homework. Is that helpful? I hope that's helpful. And for visual stimming, a sensory diet idea would be like, I love those glitter bottles. So, they glitter like this. And then, so again, there's like this light things that they just look like toys. Tough conversation. I know. So again, I think track to see, like, is it really the whole day? Track to see when he's most likely to do it. Really look at like what could be the triggers to that. But I think also having some intentional time to allow it is important. I hope that's helpful. Okay, let's see. What sort of cost-effective tools or equipment can be recommended to my parents? So to parents of autistic children at home. Did I read that right? So what cost-effective tools or equipment can be recommended? Okay, so let's go through that. I'll go back to that. Let me just go through the other questions and then I'll go back to that. Okay. So there's another question, Albert, around, do you think children with extreme sensory hypersensitivity should be treated with devices and activities that provide more or less stimulations than the child's normal indoor environment? Or is it some mix of both better than just one or the other? I know it can be so confusing, right, Albert? Okay, so I'll go back to a bit of a sensory diet presentation after I'm done here. So hopefully, but let me just get through a few more and then I'll go back to the presentation and talk about that a little bit. Okay, so what is deep pressure, David? I'll talk about that. Nicole, you're in Brazil. Here in Brazil, schools usually force children to remain seated. Something very complex for my 6-year-old son. Should I look for an alternative type of education or force him to sit for 5 hours straight? What's your opinion about this? Oh, Nicole, I know, I think the Latin American world, I'm from Argentina, so we're still far behind in recognizing neurodiversity affirming practices and the understanding that actually we are not meant to be seated for 5 hours straight. None of us can, including myself in this chair. After I'm here for an hour, I need to move. Also, the lack of understanding around vertical learning, the idea of standing up and listening, and the idea. So all of that, I understand. I think you might, Nicole, you could see if they would be willing to try a movable cushion. So, or like a deflated beach ball, and so it moves. Or like if you like, I mean, you live in Brazil, so it must be hot there, but say if you had a coat, they can sit under a coat. So as long as you provide like a bit of a movable surface, and will that help your child then, because he's seated, but he's moving, will that be an effective tool for him? So I would see if you can get some buy-in that way, with a movable cushion or a movable surface of some kind. And I think I have them in here, and I'll go back to, let me see, I'll go back to that presentation around vestibular. So see how here on this one, see how the child is sitting on like a little, like, it's called disco sit. So again, it provides a bit of movement input. Will that be enough? And if, try that, see if they'll take to that. If not, if you can you look for an alternative placement for him, just because you need to have people who support this view of a child needing to move for learning. So I hope that's helpful. Okay, so let's keep going. Okay, there are many types of weighted blankets available. Do they really help? And two, what would be the best weight for a child under 10? Okay, so a weighted blanket. So again, these are called deep pressure types of tools. A weighted blanket, when you look at the research, the only research that we have supports it for anxiety management. So during the day, you have a weighted blanket, and then you're able to, again, put it on you and use it as a way for you to have a better sense of your body. So we do have research to support that. We do not have any research that says that a weighted blanket will help you sleep longer or help you go to sleep, okay? Although many people use weighted blankets, the research is just not there for that. When it comes to how much of a weighted blanket, and again, a weighted blanket should only be used if the child has no motor differences, like, because imagine if, say, if a child also has something like epilepsy, then if they're having a seizure, they would not be able to move a weighted blanket away from them. So you have to be very cautious that when you're using something like that, that the person who's using it has no differences in their motor components, and they can easily get rid of a weighted tool of any kind. We usually say 5 to 10% of their body weight, although we see lots of weighted blankets that are heavier. But again, we're talking about children. Adults use heavier weighted blankets. So I would say, if you can, just try a child-sized weighted blanket and see if that helps in keeping him more regulated. But remember, never at night, always with supervision. So I hope, again, that that's helpful. Can the stereotypical behavior of an autistic person disappear with age, or at best shift into a different movement pattern? Yeah, Rania, I think it doesn't disappear. I think autistic people learn to mask their behaviors. They learn, and some of them, you know, they do not want to look different. And so they really do a lot of hypervigilance all the time of their bodies and control their bodies. And it's just exhausting. It sounds exhausting, I'm sure. So will it go away? No. Can people learn to become sort of masked and not be their authentic selves? Yes. Is that what we want? No. Do they change into different behaviors? I think there is, and you know, some of you guys already talked about this. There is a lot to be said around, okay, so say loud vocalizing can become a hum. So you're still getting that need met, but in a way that's more acceptable to people. So I think there is something to be said about that. So this idea of adapting that behavior into something that still supports that person, and it's not as noticeable to others. So I think there's certainly a lot to be said for that. Okay. My child is sensory seeking, wants a lot of physical interaction, hugs, loud noises, while I'm sensory avoidant. Oh no, he being touched or loud sounds. Any suggestions for attending to his sensory needs while protecting mine? I love that question. And I hope, you heard my answers to another participant around the two children with different sensory profiles. I think you could wear ear defenders yourself for the loud noises. You could also choose with your child, you could be intentional as to when you're gonna give him the hugs or the him or her. You could, so then you have some control over those types of sensory seeking behaviors, and you're able to provide that input and you're more prepared for them. And so when something is less unpredictable, it's easier for us to handle. So I think that's where I would go with you. I mean, your child is your child. It's easier for you. You have more insight. So it's you, how can you protect your senses? What can you do with your own sensory diet that helps you in managing this constant touching that is probably happening with your child, and then providing those deep pressure inputs to your child to then hopefully then he's not seeking them as often. Okay, so I hope that's helpful as a beginning. Okay, let me see. I'll keep going unless Denise, you let me know if you want me to stop, but I'll keep going with the questions.
So Moira, you can go as long as you would like to go, but
okay.
So you've got other commitments today. So I know there are a lot of questions.
Okay. So you know what? I do, why don't we do another 20 minutes? And then I do have to go to a meeting after that, but I do want to get through as many as I can. And again, thank you for being here, everyone. Okay, so I have a friend who's a 3-year-old who has a 3-year-old who is nonverbal, no eye contact, does not like touch, vocal stims, starts slow and gradually increases his volume, flaps his hands. But the mom keeps making excuses as to why her child is not meeting milestones. Most recent is ear tubes were placed, so the child was not hearing correctly, which is the reason for delay. My question is, how do we, as her friend, get her to understand her child needs therapy and other services in order to be able to function on a higher level? Nothing has worked so far. And I'm sure everyone's doing a collective like, ooh, that's very hard. As a therapist with my own circle of friends, we all have to be very careful as to what we say. And I wonder, there's a lot here. Like, I wonder whether you could just provide the mom with some resources around getting their child assessed. Perhaps that's all that we do, and you plant the seed, and the mom will be able to act when she's ready. So we meet people where they're at. Yeah, I would really proceed with caution there, because you have a friendship that you don't want to ruin. And it's very hard for people to hear from others about their children. It's very hard for all of us. So proceed with caution. And I would say abort the mission if you've tried already and it hasn't worked, and just be there for your friend. And hopefully your friend will act when she's ready. So in this world of neurodivergencies, we make positive assumptions of people. When I work with parents, I am making positive assumptions that that person is where they're at with their children because they've tried everything under the sun. And so, for example, feeding the child all the time and not having a schedule, for example. Ooh, my connection is unstable. I hope I'm okay. And so I make that positive assumption, they want to feed their child, and this is why they're not able to stick to a schedule. And then that helps me as to where I start. Okay, so I'm just gonna leave it there. Make positive assumptions. People will act when they're ready. Okay. Does a sensory kit mean a kit with things that help reduce sensory exposure or things to stimulate the senses, like brushes and feathers for touch sensitivity? I think I have a slide here with the sensory kit. Did I add that? Yes, this is one, for example. So I am going to show you. So coping strategies to use on public transport. So this is by an autistic self-advocate, headphones or ear defenders. So this is what Emily brings with her in a bag when she takes the bus. She brings earbuds, she grabs a fidget. Remember what I said about toy-like things? She brings her favorite smell. She brings something to stim with, tapping her fingers. She takes a good book, magazine, or activity, and she has something to chew or crunch. So you see that she has a kit that helps her in case she becomes overwhelmed and dysregulated. So if she's able to identify triggers towards a shutdown or a meltdown, and then she's able to use some of these tools to keep herself regulated, then she is preventing a meltdown from happening. So I hope that answers your question. Okay. Do you recommend psychomotor exercises to children with autism as routine in the morning? Do they benefit from it? There's that saying that says, kids do well if they can. And I would say kids do well if they move. So movement there's so much research that supports the use of movement for self-regulation. And even to the fact that sometimes, doctors now are prescribing exercise programs or movement programs, like sort of, again, this non-pharmacological lifestyle interventions for people who have a diagnosis of depression, for example, because they're finding the effects of movement really help the body to control things like anxiety and just feeling the stress within your body. And I think if you are somebody who likes to run or who likes to go to the gym, part of the reason why you do that is because of that feeling good quality that you get after you work out. And so it's the same thing here with children. I think definitely motor activities are very much needed for all of us as human beings, and definitely a very effective tool for self-regulation. Okay. Home remedy for visual issues. Remember, I don't use any types of remedies or medications. It's non-pharmacological in my world, so I can't answer to that one. Okay. So Erica, your son is 19 and recently has been stuffing his mouth with all of his food all at once, holding it for lengths of time. He hasn't done this since he was little. Any thoughts why he may be doing this? So remember with that proprioceptive system, that seeking of knowing where your body is in space. So you could see overstuffing as a way of your person figuring where the food is in his mouth. So if he's hypo-reactive to sensory input, a hypo-reactive person might overstuff their mouth for them to feel more. So what could you do instead? Maybe, Erica, see if he's 19. So might he use something like an electric toothbrush on his cheeks, outside of his cheeks, before he goes to the to the table to eat, so he gets a bit more input into his cheeks, into the muscles, and maybe then he won't need to overstuff as much because he will have this sort of feeling of more input around his mouth. You could also do, you could also model some like pushing the cheeks in. You could also use perhaps some alerting type of activities, like some ice crunches, like pieces of ice, and see if you can crunch of those. Again, just to kind of like, quote unquote, wake up the mouth, and then see if that might be helpful in him not needing to overstuff his mouth as much. So see where that takes you. Okay. Okay, I am from South Africa. Hello, Chanel. And I use a hot water bottle with a little bit of water on which my daughter sits to allow for movement. I love that. So this is for, and I forget your name, from Brazil, like the hot water bottle, put a little bit of water in it so it doesn't have to be hot. And then the child sits on it. Love it. Great idea. So right there, see if the school might want to accept that. And I love this, you know, I usually learn so much from not only autistic people, but parents. Parents teach me so much about like strategies like this, you know, how can we work with what we've got? So thank you so much, appreciate it. Okay, yeah, right, Teresina? So see how innovative we can be as parents, yeah. Okay, my 3-year-old got expelled from daycare, from 2 daycares. They are telling me he's got sensory issues. We got him tested through our school district, and they're telling us it's not sensory, but self-regulation. He got expelled for pushing kids and throwing things. He loves to throw, especially balls, because he loves the feedback. Who do you think I should have him evaluated by to determine how to help him? Okay. So from Anna Athanasia, maybe throw with purpose, like play catch, baseball or bowling, or dribble a basketball scene. It's heavy enough. He will also be tired. Just some ideas. Athanasia, those are great ideas. So he loves to throw. And I guess the question here, Maya, is, you know, is it that he likes looking at the ball and the trajectory of the ball? Is it that he likes the feeling of the ball leaving his hand? And I do think there's something to be said about having like a heavier type of ball, and again making that throwing behavior something that's more functional, not functional, something that's more socially accepted, like Athanasia said, throwing back and forth. I think when it comes to, you know, when it comes to who should assess him, I mean, self-regulation and sensory issues are so integrated, and your child is only 3, you know, all 3-year-olds have difficulties with self-regulation, all of them. So I really hope that, you know, I'm not sure about these 2 daycares, but I really hope that they give you more ideas than just expelling him. And again, you could try, I think, go to OT, you know, an occupational therapist, especially, I'm assuming you're in the States, Maya, you know, OTs really work in this field of early intervention and of really using sensory motor activities to help self-regulation. So if you can, have him evaluated by an OT. I think that would be most helpful. And then see how they can support you in getting your child back into a daycare, and hopefully one that's more accepting of differences. Okay, let's see. Patricia, I believe my son-in-law was undiagnosed, but on the spectrum. Okay, and my grandson, his child has mild autism. He doesn't seem to be able to accept his behaviors. Is there a video that I could get for him to understand both his son and himself? Ooh, Patricia, you're getting into hot water here. I assume that if he is your son-in-law, that you have a daughter involved in this situation, and that's where perhaps I would start, is in talking to your daughter and see how she feels about it. And start there. There's lots of videos on the internet about late diagnosed autistic people, lots. Not hard to find. There's lots of podcasts. Uniquely Human podcast is one of them, for example, by Barry Prisant and Dave Finch. So an SLP and an autistic self-advocate. They have an amazing podcast. It's called Uniquely Human. But yeah, proceed with caution, Patricia. Like I talked before, and if you do have a daughter involved in it, go to your daughter first and see how she can support the situation. Okay, let's see. My daughter is 18, and we, as her therapist, have been trying to introduce and offer a lot of sensory tools, but she would not get the sensation and would not use them. She would not like another person to offer her the sensation. She used to have deep pressure needs, would push her hands on the desk or the table. She would like to jump and run a little once she has the stimulant is around. I learned there might even be some internal triggers. I am not sure how I can help her with her sensations. And I think here, my question to you would be, what occupation, so I'm an occupational therapist, what is it that you would like for your daughter to be able to engage in? Is it, are you talking around feeding? Are you talking about going to school? Are you talking about getting on the bus? So think of the occupation first, and then if you break it down into that, then you might be able to come up with ideas to help that occupation. Because if it's just, if you think of everything, it's just too much, too overwhelming. And of course, when we become overwhelmed, we don't do very much. So just break it down as to, okay, I really want to support her in, I don't know, taking the bus. And so then you think about, okay, well, what are the sensations that might overwhelm her? So what could I have in her sensory kit? What kind of social stories can I use for her to be able to predict what kind of motor support that she need to be able to get onto the bus? Does she need for you to go with her first? Those kinds of things. So break it down for you to know more as to what might be helpful in each context. Okay, so I hope that's helpful. All right. My daughter takes her books everywhere. We always thought books were her security blanket. If there are too many, if there's too much stimulation around, she would focus on her books. I guess that is how she copes. Yes, it's, yeah, that's her security blanket. You said it perfectly well. And, a lot of us have our own security blankets, no matter how old we are, right? So it could be a picture of your children that I carry in my wallet. It could be a particular ring that I like to fiddle with. It could be my phone. How dysregulated is it if I don't have my phone with me, right? So yes, supporting that is books. So again, not something to be changed or fixed. She has her books and they help her manage her world. And that is great. And she found a strategy that works. And how amazing is that? Okay. Oh, David, you asked a tough question. What causes sensory issues in autism? And the answer to that is I don't know. I think there's lots of theories, and I think there's lots of neurobiology. There's lots of studies that go on, and I can certainly, again, I'll send a study of some of the latest research that finds that there's no neural signatures differences in autism versus someone with OCD, for example. But again, I'm not a doctor. That's not what appeals to me. So I don't know enough to answer that question, but I can certainly send you Dr. Fakri Shafai is the person that did the first section of this webinar. And she talked about that in her webinar, and she is a PhD researcher. So that question is definitely something that she can answer very well. And I do think that she talked about some of the different theories as to what causes sensory processing differences in part 1 of this webinar series. So there you go. Just go back and watch that one because it's very good. Okay. I don't see, I see some messages. Let me just check my messages quickly here. And then, let me just see, 1 second. Just to make sure that I have all the questions. I'm just going back to the chat here because I know that it can be confusing.
So Moira, there was a question about issues and referrals for adults diagnosed after age 50. And I was referring that question to Fakhri's presentation because she did talk about some of that. And, you know, Fakhri is leading a group of people who are talking about issues for midlife and seniors. So I think that's a good place to point. But did you have any other input here? This person, Claudia, is asking.
Yeah, you know, AID Canada is an amazing, and I want to say AID Canada. Is it CA or org? Can you check that, Denise, and put it? But that's where Dr. Fakhri Shafai is from. And that website is amazing, especially for autistic adults. I mean, you could spend days on that website learning everything under the sun. And it's all research-based. It's all reviewed by external reviewers. So I think it's fabulous. And that's where you will get lots of answers around adults on the spectrum on that. So definitely. So Denise will just put the link to AID Canada. Okay, so let me just keep looking. Okay. Yeah, so I see that some people are confused around the fact that this is a 2-part presentation. So I do work with Dr. Fakhri Shafai in many other projects. And so she presents on the neuroscience of sensory processing differences, and I present on the strategies and the sensory diet approach. So that's how we divided this one. Okay, let's see. Claudia, so I'm just gonna read this comment. In theory, so I'm assuming you are autistic. In theory, we're not less, but in practice, we're viewed as such within an ableist society. I was diagnosed 7 months ago at the age of 57 after a neuropsychological evaluation. The struggle for supportive services has been exhausting and disheartening. The overwhelm of the pandemic and multiple intersecting major losses has brought me to the edge. Regarding sensory challenges in particular, my sensitivity to noise, sound, and scent has always been a problem for me and others, and has become more intense the past few years. I carry earplugs with me in your purse, in your backpack, in your vehicle, and have used them when in a crowded store, and I found it so helpful. I then have to remember to pay attention because it's easy for me to get lost in my own world with all the external sounds muted, right? It's also a safety risk on foot. I almost ran into a car in the parking lot, right? So you need to really exactly be vigilant around your environment. Not sure how to work with the scent sensitivity other than avoid putting myself in closed environments. Yes, and so for everybody, what a great comment, and also for the neuromajority, for us to understand just how challenging life can be for autistic people in such a sensory unpredictable world. And Claudia, you know, when it comes to scent, it is such a hard one because yes, unless you, I mean, in Canada and the United States, we are mostly in scent-free environments in terms of, like, I work in a hospital, for example. So of course we wouldn't have those perfumes and that kind of thing. But I would say something like smelling coffee right before you go into a closed area, because that sort of nulls your senses a little bit. I would also suggest carrying a scent that you can manage. So carrying it in like a little canister and then smelling that before you go into an environment that's actually dysregulating for you. So then you can actually use sense to harness. You can use prefer sense for you to be able to function. So I'm going to put that there. Okay, I'll send a couple of articles to Denise. So the vocal stimming one, the research one. Was there something else that I said I would send? Thank you, Monir, about loving the presentation. My daughter is 18. We have friends to introduce sensory tools, but she would not really respond to them except for some jumping and running. We tried to provide her with some sensory regimen, but it has been really hard. I know it's hard, especially because sometimes, you know, we want people to be proactive and to seek it. And I think in autism, people also need to have a lot of time to learn to do something. So just to give you an example, I was working with a family last Friday, and I mentioned about like, okay, well, let's try a tug of war before he comes into the house and seeing if that deep pressure might help him in staying regulated through the snack time. And the mom made a really important comment, and she says, well, Moira, but that means that I have to teach him that whole skill. That means that I have to spend time teaching him what to do for him to get that input in a tug of war. And I thought, what a great, you know, lesson for me, because yes, then that is not something that we can implement, because the time that it would take for this child to learn that new skill is not something that the mom is able to do right now. So then of course, that's a productive fail, right? Okay, so I suggested something, the mom told me why it wouldn't work. So now I know, okay, then how about we try something that is passive, which means that then the mom is actually putting like 2 pillows around the child's arms and pushing in to provide some deep pressure, but the child is not actually proactively doing the activity. So do you know what that means? So again, even when our suggestions fail, or when you try something and it fails, it gives you information as to what might work for your next thing to try. Okay. All right, 5 more minutes, and then my son used to seek few sensory inputs, but recently he's seeking sensory input all the time, bumping into sofas, wanting to jump on his trampoline, chewing his clothes, screaming loud. Is it possible for some food or issues to trigger his yes. So remember, there's a correlation with gastrointestinal issues and self-injury behavior, you know, out of the blue behavior. I would certainly look for like, is there pain? Is there something that could be happening and that your child is just not able to tell you? Could that definitely take a look at that? And especially if that is your instinct, like if this is so out of sorts with your person, I would definitely look at, you know, is there pain? Is there something going on, like teeth? Is there a cavity? And that your person is just not able to tell you what's going on.